Live. What's up, guys? Austin here. Today we're going to review 10 things you didn't know about waterproofing decks. And I got about 6 in my head, but I'm sure 4 more will pop out as I spitball through this. So let's start out by putting some context behind it. There's a lot of balconies and decks that are all over Southern California and a lot of different California properties throughout the state. And I haven't been to many other states and done inspections, but a lot of the times, instead of having something where water goes through, you can actually have a balcony or a deck or a roof that is coated in some type of material, and we'll get into that. But basically what it is it's a cementitious product that you put on top of plywood, and it has different layers in it that makes it impervious to water. And you can actually have a room underneath the deck. So let's say you have a deck that's already built and is very structurally sound. You could technically throw some walls on there, put a waterproof coating on the top, and then have that as an ADU, which stands for additional dwelling unit. Number one, first thing you didn't know, it's a cementitious product. Or if you did, then we'll go on to number two. Number two is most of the products are made by a company called West Coats System or Enduro Coats System. And those are just different brands. And those different brands have very similar processes in how they're installed. So essentially it's plywood. In that plywood you install it, obviously it's 4x8 sheets, but they're going to butt up to each other. But before you put the product down, you want to put a tape over the seams. But you can't just use any regular tape. This tape is like an asphalt type tape. It's very, very sticky, like a zip tape. But the top of zip tape, it is smooth and shiny. This tape that you put over the seams, it has some fuzzies on there. And those fuzzies bond to whatever you pour on top of it. So you can't use regular zip tape. Even though it would bridge the gap, the coating that you put on top of it has to be able to bond to the tape. Okay, so after you put your plywood on and you have the tape, you obviously need to flash the whole thing. A lot of people will use the wrong flashing. You have to use something called bonderized flashing. Same thing. It almost has like a black tint to it. You can't use just galvanized or regular aluminum flashing. That will fail and delaminate. You have to use bonderized flashing or bonderized sheet metal. With the bonderized sheet metal, it has a primer on there for the product that you add over it, because a lot of times the flashing is underneath whatever product you put on there. And that product has to be able to bond to the flashing, because that's one of the main failure points. Number 3 or number 4 is people in the past, they were using nails with their nailer through the plywood into the framing. No, you need to use screws. All the systems that I see failing, what they are over the years is the expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. The nail head will actually work its way up through the tape, through the lath, and then pop out of the cementitious portion, which is a direct entry hole for the water to get in, which is no bueno. Number 5, in the past, West Coats Systems, Enduro Coats Systems, or the other brands in the different states that you might use, they weren't using a lath, or excuse me, it's a mesh. All the systems used a lath, like a stucco lath, like a diamond lath, where you put it on first. And that will definitely strengthen it and make it less likely to crack, and you overlap the seams. But they will still crack 10, 15 years down the road. And that's why West Coats and Enduro Coats came up with a solution to that, because it's in these high-end luxury homes that have these rooftop decks or these balconies that have been upgraded. They put basically a fiberglass mesh in there, And after you put your lath, we embed the mesh. It's just a fiber mesh. It kind of looks like a net, but it's very, very flat. And basically, after you put your second slurry coat on, I tamper it in to the wet slurry coat. And I'm going to call that number 5. So number 5 is that you actually have to put a mesh. And before it was called like an ALX standard coating system, but with the new mesh, they turned it into an ALX Pro system. And also the cementitious formula, the chemistry behind the formula has been changed a little bit. The chemistry now has been changed to add a little bit of epoxy. And one thing that was driving me nuts is I looked through the MSDS, and that's the manufacturer data safety sheet, or the install specs, and they'll never tell you an exact amount of product to put in, because depending on the temperature it is at outside on the given day and where you are in the batch number, it will vary. So you do need to play with the products a little bit, because even if you go to the instructions, it'll give you a variance. So we'll call that number 6. Number 7, kind of like concrete, but it dries even faster, has an accelerant in there that's going to cause it to cure really, really fast. So what you need to do is you need to wake up at the butt crack of dawn, and you need to install this stuff really early when it's cool. And obviously you don't want to install it when it's really cold, because then the opposite issue. So you want to install it on a regular day, no rain in the forecast, early in the day. But another issue, we'll call this number 8, is the sun. When it does come up, direct sunlight will literally cause this stuff, and we're talking about the cementitious coating, is going to cause it to cure twice as fast. And so that means if you have a balcony or a deck, here we go. There we go, Southwest, San Diego. Got some lowriders in the house. Looks like we got a little bit of a photo shoot. Got homeboy here. Got San Diego in the background. Where were we? Oh yes, if you're installing this on a balcony and there's sun and it's coming up from the east and it's going south over the horizon, then it's only hitting half the balcony. What I would recommend is to understand that once you get into the sun, it's going to cure a lot faster. So you're going to need to tell your mixer to start mixing it up a little bit more soupy. That means a little bit more water, so that it doesn't cure too fast on you, so that you can handle it a little bit faster, so that you don't get stuck, working with the material that you're going to have to rip out or unhappy with. We'll call that 7. Number 8 is you rarely ever see the texture of Westcoat's or EnduroCoat system as a sand finish. There's an aggregate in there, and you can use those green floats, and you wet down your float with the perfect amount of water, just kind of like stucco or concrete, and you float it, right? You float it, and that'll pop out the aggregate and give it that grit feel. But you rarely ever see that, because making a surface with a perfect sand finish, which I prefer, and I'll actually encourage the customer to pay for, and when I have the option, I'll always spend a little bit of extra time putting a sand finish. But what you see the most of is going to be kind of like a knockdown, because when you install your 3rd coat over your bonderized flashing, over the tape with the felt on there, over the lath, integrated the lath with the mesh in there, and you're doing your final top coat, you got to understand that it has to be perfect. Otherwise, you're going to get complaints. So what a lot of contractors will do is they'll pour it on, they'll trowel it, and they'll just give it a rough float. It means going over it with a specialized sponge, if you will. I like to use the green floats, and it'll pull up the aggregate. And because if you don't do it perfect, you don't take the time, you don't make sure that your chemistry is perfect, and it's setting too fast, what'll happen is it'll look crappy. It'll look final, and you'll just kind of like a stucco that isn't screeded well. You'll look at it from the side, and it'll look kind of wavy, and it'll look kind of crappy. So what masks that is when you get your hopper or you get your dash brush and you dip it into the product and you throw it on there, and it throws chunks over it, and then you let it set, and then you grab your trowel and you knock it down. Look, here's another one. Comment below if you saw what brand that was. The best airline ever. At least it wasn't Spirit or Frontier. Anyways, that was number 8, is talking about the difference between a sand finish and a knockdown finish, and why you rarely ever see a sand finish, but you do see knockdown finishes. Is because the knockdown finish is technically an additional step, but it actually makes it look better if your third coat isn't really well done and you have more variables to control when you're trying to control a sand finish on this type of product. And other than that, if you want to make sure that your bonderized flashing is sealed down to the substrate itself, in this case we're talking about plywood, but this can be done over concrete. And another tip, since we're getting super technical about it and I'm giving away all the secrets, is let's say you have this waterproofing surface and there is a crack to it, but the customer doesn't have 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 grand to make this super nice waterproof decking system. Well, and there's a crack in the existing and it has a failure point, one of those that I mentioned that I'm not going to review, but you can go back and listen to it. But let's say there's a crack. You can actually get a 2-part epoxy and cut out little slivers of that mesh, that fiberglass mesh that I was talking about that goes on top of slurry coat number 2. And you can actually basically grind off where the crack is and pull out any of the loose chunks. And of course, there might be a little bit of rot underneath, but you're gonna have to instruct the customer that, hey, there might be rot underneath, hey, there might be mold underneath, which you can go under. If it's drywall, if it's stucco, cut that open, because it's a lot less risky to go under and do a repair as far as, you know, treating the wood than it is to open up the deck surface. Because I learned from my mistakes that you can cut out this complex waterproofing system, but since there's such a low tolerance for the expansion contraction for the old material versus the new material, it'll just crack right around the perimeter of your repair. And so what I found, a repair that worked best for concrete or this other waterproofing system, which I won't even do on a substrate that is plywood, but I will do on a substrate that is concrete, is get the 2-part, of course, get my flat grinder, and I'll grind off so that there's an inlay on whatever surface that I'm working with. And then I'll chip out anything that's kind of chippy, if you will. And then I'll get a high-grade polyurethane, which is about 13 bucks per tube. And then I'll push that in there. And then, like I said, I'll get some mesh, I'll cut that, and then I'll get the epoxy 2-part, and I'll put it on. But this epoxy is a 2-part, but it doesn't cure completely hard like regular epoxy. You can actually go to West Coast System and get it online. It's like $100 for one little tub of it, 2 little tubs, a part A and a part B. But when it cures like a really hard rubber. And then I integrate the mesh in there, and then basically I skim coat it again with this rubberized epoxy combo. And I found that that stuff, once it goes onto something just like the Sikaflex 1A, it's never coming off. And there you have it. 10 things. I mean, I went over 30 things that you didn't know about waterproofing systems, that are luxury waterproofing systems, that are fully waterproof, that is a cementitious base. But keep in mind, it has other additives in there that are proprietary. And a concrete guy once mentioned, concrete's never waterproof, it's porous. Well, things have come a long ways. Anyways, if you learn anything, comment below. Otherwise, till next time, later.